Come on over here, I want to show you guys.
You always put your face in the camera. We are going to talk about single joint exercises versus compound joint exercises, or multi-joint exercises.
This is a continuation of the last video that we just did, which was movement versus muscle. And a couple times I found us talking about compound versus single joint movements. And I want to make sure we're clear on that. A lot of people don't know what that is, and you hear that thrown around a lot in the fitness community. So we want to break down the difference between a single joint movement, a compound joint movement, and the pros and cons of each of them.
And all exercises can kind of be placed into these two categories. So single joint exercises, let me tell you what those are. It's like it sounds. They operate primarily at one joint. Now I say primarily because you're never really isolating a single joint in an exercise, but there is really only one joint doing most of the movement. So a good example would be a curl. When I'm doing a curl, the only joint that's bending would be my elbow. A compound movement is going to use two or more joints. So whereas this is a single joint movement, if I were to do something like this, now I'm using other joints. By the way, that's not an exercise.
Or this in a press.
Right,
would be probably a better example.
Exactly, because this is not an exercise unless you're telling someone to screw off. Anyhow, single joint exercises. Let's talk about some of the pros, why you'd want to do them, and some of the cons, and then Adam can cover.
Another good example for people besides just a bicep curl is most machines.
Machines tend to be that. Yeah.
Most machines tend to be single joint exercise. You sit in a isolated position, or stationary position, and then you're hinging at one point, whether it be a leg extension or a preacher curl.
Leg curl or something like that.
Yes, so most machines tend to be single joint movements. Some of the pros, they're a lot safer. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot of muscles that are having to speak to each other to actually perform the movement. So it's a lot safer and it's a lot easier.
It's pretty easy to teach a bicep curl.
Right.
Compared to like a barbell row or something like that.
There's not a lot of room for error for someone to mess up a single joint movement. And it's also great for targeting a specific area. So if there's an area that I'm trying, especially being a men's physique guy, where I'm trying to build a specific part of my body or one small little muscle I want to develop, it's great for targeting an area of the body. So those are some of the pros of the single joint movement.
Now, some of the cons, not super functional. If I get super strong on an isolation type machine or super strong in a single joint movement, there's not a lot of carryover to the real world or to the football field or to the baseball diamond or wherever, because it's not teaching my body to work in unison. So for example, getting really strong at the leg extension is not going to make me as strong on the field as a barbell squat, which would be a compound movement. There's also very low calorie burn. I'm not using a lot of muscle. So I'm in the gym, I'm spending an hour working out. All I'm doing are single joint movements. I'm not going to burn nearly as many calories as if I'm doing compound type movements. There's also, you build less muscle, mainly because you're just using less muscles, but also because the load tends to be lower. You're not using nearly as much weight as when you do a compound movement. Now let's talk about some of the pros of the compound joint movements. High calorie burn, barbell squats and deadlifts and overhead presses. They just burn a lot more calories because I'm using so many more muscles and so many more joints. They build more muscle on a case-by-case basis, bang for your buck basis. The compound movements, they just build the most muscle because you're working out more.
That's because more muscles are having to, again, speak to each other to perform a movement. If you're doing a compound movement, which would be exercises like a squat, a deadlift, an overhead press, a lot is going on in a movement like that requiring more muscle. If it requires more muscle, it's obviously going to burn more calories and it's obviously going to burn more total overall muscle. It may not build more muscle in that specific area that you're trying to focus on, but overall, you're going to build more muscle on your body by doing compound lifts.
It's also more functional. It translates to the real world. If you get strong at these big, what are called gross motor movement, compound type exercises, then you're going to just be strong in the real world. It's going to translate.
And an example of that, again, is so you could have extremely strong biceps because you progress on the preacher curl machine and you started off at 50 pounds, now you're curling 200 pounds. And what that means by it's not as functional is, when have you ever just been in a locked position to grab something to pick it up. Normally you have to bend over to pick something up, which does require some bicep strength to do that, but then you also have all these other muscles working synergistically in order to perform that. So that's what Sal means by it's more functional to do these compound lifts that require more muscles to have to speak
Exactly.
to each other.
Let's talk about some of the cons. Higher risk. Of course, they're much more complex. There's a lot more moving parts. It's a lot easier to screw up. And if I do screw up, I tend to have more weight on my back or in my hands or on my arms because I'm using more than one joint. They can actually strengthen dysfunction. What do I mean by that? Well, if I'm doing a squat movement and I've got poor hips firing, my hips aren't firing the way they should, and I just do tons of squats without my hips because they're not firing well, I'm strengthening that bad recruitment pattern. I'm not correcting it, so I'm actually making things a lot worse. Isolation movements or single joint movements don't really have that capability quite as much because you're always using just one joint. Lastly, they're very difficult to learn. It takes years of perfection and practice to really do a good barbell squat or a deadlift or even a bench press or even a barbell row, whereas it doesn't take much time to learn how to do a tricep press down or a leg extension.
Well, there's a reason why they have competitions around this. It's like a sport: squatting, bench pressing, overhead press, the deadlift. These are all skills, and I've been doing it for 15 plus years. I still do not have a perfect squat. I still do not have a perfect deadlift. I'm continuing to make progress, and that is something that I think a lot of people are scared of, and so they stay away from it. But instead of staying away from it, you just need to regress back off a little bit, focus being controlled form, so you can get to the point of getting all the benefits from the compound.
Now, if you're designing your own workout, the meat and potatoes of your program should be this right here, but you should definitely throw in some of these for well-balanced development, for connection to those muscles, and for aesthetics. So a good routine, lots of compound movements, or at least focus a lot of your energy on the compound movements, and then throw in some good single joint movements to isolate those areas you really want to focus on.
I love to give basic takeaways. I know this is our YouTube channel, and our programs include all this, but if you don't have our programs, a simple general rule I try and tell everybody is almost every day you work out in the gym, there should be one of the major compound lifts in there.
I totally agree.
I think that whether it be the squat, the deadlift, overhead press, barbell, at least one major compound lift in every workout should be, if not multiple.
I fully agree. So again, meat and potatoes of your program and sprinkle in some single joint movements. And for most of you, that will be a great routine. Look, we post a new video every single day, so subscribe to this channel. Also, check out our podcast, Mind Pump, on iTunes.